Cool, that should be recording now. I've already introduced myself, and so it's Rebecca and Linus. So maybe Philippa, would you like to just say a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I work at the University of Melbourne. I'm about 2 years out from my PhD, and I'm 1 year into a 3-year contract working on a project called Building Connections, which is about how schools can be built to better interact with their communities. So how would you get a school playground used on nights and weekends, or how would you accommodate a medical centre or a language learning class in a school? So yeah. I've been in and around Melbourne Uni for about 7 years on a range of different contracts until I got this one. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for coming.
And that's been a really successful, like that architecture of schools program. It's been phenomenally successful. They've got like funding from the ARC year on year for a long time now. I'm really impressed.
They're quite an impressive group. They're my new bosses and colleagues. They are pretty on the ball, and a lot of it's to do with the high energy of my boss Ben Cleveland, and his extremely good stakeholder relationships. He lives and breathes relationships and friendships with the people his stakeholders. So yeah, I'm learning a lot by watching him in action.
Yeah, cool.
Mette, did you want to introduce yourself? Also, feel free to pass if anyone doesn't want to do the introduction. It's not mandatory.
Sorry, my microphone was off. I had bad oysters yesterday, so I'm not very communicative, and that's why my camera was not on.
We really appreciate you being here, because that's usually a devastating situation.
I won't go into details. But yes, I finished my PhD early on this year, and it is on pokies, but looking at or challenging the whole idea of utilitarian approach to social policy, and moving into trying to string a publication kind of thread. I want to sort of line it up with ethics of care and social justice and that. And I'm just, I'm not particularly strategic, and that's why I'm here to be more strategic.
Mm-hmm.
That's me, and I'll just turn my microphone off again, and maybe my video, depending on how we go.
Good luck.
Rachel's also a member of AECURN. She's the co-chair from RMIT. Do you want to say a quick word, Rachel?
Yes, yeah. I also didn't think I was going to be on camera, so hence this situation. But yeah, so I'm RMIT. I'm just about 2-year mark in my PhD, and it's on actually I don't even know what it's on. It's on the yeah. It's on embodied experience of it's on social spatial behavior in cities, but particularly around utilitarian form and like underutilized forms like steps and stairs, and looking at this kind of affective experience of the city through that spatial lens, and the way that contributes to, and then assessing that through a heritage paradigm. Yep.
Great. Reva's also a co-chair from the University of Melbourne. Might not be there at the moment. And Louisiana, I remember meeting you at SOAC.
Yes. Hey, so hi everyone. Sorry, I was also with my camera off. So nice to see some of you again, and nice to meet you, the new ones. So I'm a PhD candidate at RMIT working on transport planning, and on the final stage of my thesis. Desperate, my rope is just the time is clicking with the clock. So yeah, I'm very excited with this, besides the craziness. So good to see you all again. Thanks for organizing.
Good to see you, Louisiana.
Yeah, good to see you too. And Natalie? and Yiki Ku. All right, maybe that's all the introductions we're going to get. So I guess, Jonathan, that gives you a feel for the room and who will be speaking there. I'll hand over to you now if you'd like to start.
Oh, thank you. Look, Declan asked me to talk really about how you present yourself and how you present yourself as an academic, particularly when you are writing up some sort of CV for a job application or a funding application, anything where you have to talk about who you are, right? And it comes from a post that I wrote a few years ago called Narrative of Ideas that I wrote for the Research Whisperer blog. And that came out of, I was working with someone on their grant application. It was a fellowship. And I knew this person, like they were a colleague who's a friend kind of thing. So I knew their background really well. They'd done amazing things with the UN. They'd done amazing things in Africa. They'd done amazing things in Europe. And none of that was in their rope section, in ARC terms, in their CV, right? And what they'd done is they'd kind of answered the questions, but they just hadn't talked about themselves and where they'd come from in a compelling way. So I have a presentation, and Declan has notes that he can send around at some point. So from my point of view, and I should start the clock here because I'm trying to time this so that we get through it. I'm going to make you work. From my point of view, anytime you're talking about yourself, you want to be able to make statements, but you need to have those statements backed up by evidence. And what I want to do is give you a simple kind of way to do that, and then a way to then try and use those statements to map the development of your ideas so that you can present them to someone as, here is the way my intellectual development has gone, and here are all the things that have influenced that, and here's what's come out of it, and you know, here are the different threads. So let's see how that works. This idea of statements backed by evidence is a really important one, and it's one I kind of enjoy working in the Faculty of Science, because the people in the Faculty of Science, they're all about the evidence, right? It's like, if you don't have the data, there is no statement to make, is most of their attitude. But a good example of this is something like, I am a genius, right? That is a statement. And there is no evidence that you have that demonstrates that, you know, that actually I am a genius, right? If I say I am a genius and I have won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, all of a sudden it's like, okay, statement, evidence. All right, now I'm kind of with you. And what happens a lot of the times, the problem with CVs and the sort of statements that you need to make in your CVs that drive me crazy, or in job applications, is you're often trying to, it often feels a little bit dirty. You're often trying to lift yourself up. You're often trying to say things you wouldn't normally say. You know, I've been very innovative in the way I've developed blah, or, you know, you're using all these words that you're trying to connect with. And if they don't have an evidence part of it, it comes across as being really hollow, right? The I am a genius, it's just like, actually, that's not the way we do things in Australia. Like, the Americans have a very different approach to CVs. It's all like, oh, in Texas, everything's big in Texas. You know, it's that kind of, I am the best. We are all the best. And I've bootstrapped myself to being just, you know, a genius by myself. And, you know, in the UK, it's much more, yes, you know, every morning I had to wake up 5 hours before I went to sleep and, you know, scrub the gravel. It's a different kind of attitude. But in Australia, we tend to just say, look, this is who I am. Take it or leave it. And the problem with the job application or with a grant application is it's a competitive process, right? It's not, there's a guy from Canada who says it's not a test, it's a contest, right? You're not aiming to get 50%, you are aiming to beat the other applicants. And so you tend to try and put your best foot forward and whatever. What I want to do is just start with the evidence, right? So what I want to do is I want you to take 5 minutes, and I'll just talk about what we're going to talk about. I want you to take 5 minutes and just assemble all the evidence you have. You may already have this, you know, CV or something else, publications list, all this stuff. But what's the evidence of what you've done? And what are the things you can bring to bear if you are trying to convince someone, right? So papers, talks, other things, you know, industry reports, anything that's an expression of your ideas, your work history, where you've worked before, who your academic mentors were, what time you've spent at different universities, if you've gone to visit a university for a period of time, those sorts of things, what teaching experience you've had. I want you to just assemble in one place, so you've got them to hand, because we're going to do stuff with it, anything that shows where you've come from, right? And if you're working on your phone, all I'm going to do is ask you all to just mute and spend 5 minutes. I'm going to turn the clock on and just take 5 minutes bringing that stuff together in a way. So if you've got a question, just, if you don't understand, just put the question into chat. But I'm going to turn the timer on now, and we're just going to spend 5 minutes quietly working on assembling all of our evidence.
Jonathan, there's just a question from Linus. Do you want to respond in the chat? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll respond in the chat. Okay, that was 5 minutes. It may have felt like an eternity, or it may have felt like actually I was just doing email or playing, battleships, but it was 5 minutes. Did anyone have trouble with that stuff? Like that you don't have it to hand, or it was difficult?
For most of mine, I applied for a job last year. So most of that stuff I have to hand, except academic mentors. And that's something I've never considered. So that was kind of quite a good little thought exercise to just to think that one through, actually. So thanks for that.
It's one of the things. It's one of the standard things that they ask for in ARC applications.
Yeah, I've never done an ARC, so it is actually I haven't had to think about it yet.
Okay, and it will come into play in the next kind of section. Was there other questions or things that people had?
Yeah, I kind of went through and wrote publications, teaching, conference, all that sort of stuff, and then I wrote a heading for PhD, and then found I couldn't really write anything under PhD because I don't know, other than like the tangible outputs you have associated with it, there just like didn't really seem to be anything to write under it. Like
well, you have a PhD, right? That's one.
Well, I mean, no, I'm in the process of getting.
So you're in the process of getting one. All right, okay, but yeah, all right. Being halfway through a PhD is an achievement in and of itself. This will come into play in the next bit. Then you'll see how to put stuff under your PhD heading, I think. Okay, so the next question is, all right, what are those things evidence of? And from my point of view, if you are applying for an academic position or if you're applying for a funded grant, in general, they're evidence of your ideas, right? Sometimes, like a paper, they are an expression of that idea. They are, or they're evidence of not necessarily an idea, but a method, right? So sometimes this paper demonstrates, the development of my ideas about blah. But sometimes it's, well, actually, I'm third author on this paper. This paper just demonstrates that I know how to run, 300 interviews in a year and do the transcription and do the analysis for those interviews, or whatever method you might be interested in. This was an action research project. This paper demonstrates my efficacy at action research, something like that. Sometimes it's not an expression of that idea or that method. Sometimes it's about the development of an idea. And this is where mentors come in, right? So I was inspired to move into the area of blah by this person. I took up a PhD in this topic because my lecturer in third year blah was so inspirational, right? Sometimes they're evidence of independence. Before I undertook my academic career, I worked for 3 years as, as a parking attendant. And this has led to my interest in, car parking policy. Or I spent 3 years in Japan, and this is why I've concentrated on Japan as a topic. Sometimes it's like I spent 2 months in a lab in Sydney working with so and so, and the way they approached participant-based design really changed my attitude to how that could be used. There's a bunch of things that these sorts of things, but in general, it's either evidence of stuff you've done. Sometimes it's evidence of where you want to go. Is the other thing. I am currently working with these people so that I can move into this area, which is slightly different to the topic of my PhD or whatever. I'm signaling that I'm moving in some way. So, but in general, you want to think of, okay, what do these provide evidence of? What can I what can I use this evidence to back up the statement, right? The statement is, I know how to do phenomenological, surveys. Okay, what evidence do I have of that? And so if you work backwards from the evidence, you can go, for all the things you've listed, what I want you to do is now take 5 minutes and just beside as many as possible, just go, well, what is this useful evidence for? And some of them might be multiple things, right? So again, if you could please mute, and if you've got questions, just put them into chat. I'll have the chat open and I'll answer in chat. But just for as many of the things as you like, and if you're not going to get through them all, pick the ones that seem most important and just go, okay, well, what is this evidence of? Is it evidence of formation of ideas? Is it an expression of ideas? Is it methods? Is it, independence? Is it direction I want to go? Is it inspiration? So 5 minutes on the clock. Let's go. Sorry, I've just put up the slide that actually gives you, these are some of the things you can be thinking about. Okay, there you go. That's another 5 minutes of your life gone. So again, were there things there that people found easy, things there that people found hard?
Well, it's a different way of thinking about it, I think. And it sort of opens up for you to take more liberties than I sort of previously think about in terms of writing a CV, that it's puts very much more agency in your own hand, I think, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, you can make quite bold statements now with this, and statements that you may not have necessarily either thought of making or been prepared to make, right? So it's kind of handy in that way, I think, anyway. Okay, so the next bit, so and I, from my point of view, so I spend my life effectively reading people's grant applications and wielding the big red pen of clarity, right? And grant applications by and large consist of three parts. There's the project description, what you're going to do. There's the budget, how much you're asking for, and there's the CV. Who are you? You know, and from my point of view, this approach improves that CV part of what you're doing, just no end, right? I just wish more people would do this. So, but you can take it one step further. So, so now what I want to talk about is just mapping your journey, your development as a researcher, as someone with ideas, right? There are essentially two ways that most CVs or most kind of explanations of your work life, your curriculum vitae work, and that is you know, from the point you were born forward to now, or from now backwards, right? And what I want to suggest is there's another way to do it, and it's a bit trickier. It's quite difficult to get right, but if you do get it right, it can be a lot more effective. And it's about, rather than saying, because the problem with a linear kind of progression is it can quite often become, I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I published this, and then I did this, and then I did this. And it's difficult for the reader to draw out what the really kind of important themes are, right? So what I'm going to suggest is that you can map your development as a person with ideas, and you can help them understand that. So you can group the statements that you've got by ideas, right? So you might be saying, for example, in 2018, I spent 3 amazing months in, the University of Woolloomooloo, working with blah, who really changed my approach to DAR. Since that time, I've been working on a paper with them, a joint paper about blah, and that was published last year. And that is one statement about a particular idea or a particular space that you've been in, right? And you might be saying, prior to that, I had real expertise in grounded theory. And I am now bringing that to bear on this idea of blah. And it's kind of like, so you're not saying, in 2016, I became an expert in grounded theory. In 2018, I spent time at the University of Woolloomooloo. In 2020, I'm publishing a paper with the people at Woolloomooloo, and now I'm doing something else about grounded theory. And people are going, oh, you're all over the place. It's like, here's this idea, and here's, this development of the idea, right? And not everything's going to fit is the problem, right? Often you're going to look at stuff and you go, well, why did I do that project? That project, it's kind of like, why did I end up going out with that person? They were a disaster. But it happened, and you might leave it out, or you might just say, this particular thing is of interest because of blah, and it's 2 sentences, and you just leave it there. You know, it's kind of like, oh, that's kind of handy. There might be some things, and the grouping is the difficult thing. You know, what size do you have? Is it you've done 2 things and they make a group? Is it 5 things? No, you know, it's kind of, and that's something I can't really help with. That's absolutely a judgment call. But in guiding yourself around what should I leave out, what should I put in, how should I clump things, right? This is absolutely a butcher's paper. You people in design will be all over this. This is absolutely a design exercise, right? What do your readers care about most, right? If you're going for a academic job, then what are the criteria for the job? Who are the sort of people are going to be interviewing you, and what are they going to care about? If you're applying, for me, it's much easier. And hang on, I have my T-shirt here. So read the guidelines is my mantra.
That's
right?
hilarious.
So Chin and I basically just read the guidelines, read the guidelines, read the guidelines. But for example, if you are applying to the ARC, the Australian Research Council, they're very bold. They just say, we care about excellence. That is our one overriding concern when we select people to fund for DECRAs or whatever. If on the other hand, you are applying to Melbourne City Council, well, actually, they have a very different set of guidelines, and they have a very different approach to what they'll fund. You know, the Maya Foundation, they're coming from a different view of the world, right? So you want to take that in, and also, in the end, it'll come down to how much space do I have? You know, those sorts of criteria as well. But again, I'm going to do the shut up and write thing because I love it. 5 minutes. Just go through and do the really difficult exercise now, which is try and take some of that stuff where you've got your evidence, you know what it's evidence of, and try and group it and just make some general kind of spaces. And we'll come back. And if you get stuck, I'll be in chat. Okay, there we go. That was another 5 minutes. Do people know about Shut Up and Write? Yeah, okay, all right,
Yeah.
good.
AECURN holds a digital version of that now.
Ah, cool, excellent. Yeah, it's become quite popular, and I love it. It's the only way I get work done. Okay, so let's talk about, what did people find that tricky? Declan, did you find a space for where your PhD fitted, where things came out of it? And the other thing is, does anyone have an example that they are willing to share of things that they now feel they can say that they might group together?
Yeah, I did find a spot, and I think it was kind of based around mainly the mentors that you mentioned. So starting the narrative with who you're working with and the ideas that you've developed with them, and then through the PhD and everything that's come out of that. And then also, I started my PhD because of my master's, and there was a link between two people there. So, you can talk about how this previous mentor introduced you to these concepts, then introduced you to this person, and you've now developed this body of work.
The mathematicians are mad for this. They you can literally, for any given person with a PhD in maths, there's a site where you can go to, and it shows for that person who were their supervisors, who were their supervisors, who were their supervisors, going back, to time immemorial, and who is that person supervised, who did they supervise, because in maths, this idea of mentoring and development of ideas and spreading of ideas, really, really fundamental. And it's really strong. You can often trace your intellectual journey just by the people you've worked with, and sometimes the people you've hated. Mette, the other thing I was going to say about your comment before is, the other nice thing about this is you can make these statements with confidence. Like you don't have to hide from these statements. You don't have to cringe about them. It's like, yeah, I'm confident that this is a reasonable statement to make, and I think that's nice as well.
And I just like your, that's just confidence boosting, because when I just map my own sort of ideas, just roughly in these 5 minutes, of course, is going from working as a clinician with problem gamblers and then doing a practitioner research fellowship at Monash, that took me into a PhD that sat in the medical science. That then when I started interviewing, it prompted me, like what they were saying had nothing to do with they were sick. It had everything to do with these machines were in this space. So then all of a sudden I got interested in urban planning and spatial justice, which then took me into critical urban theory and is now pushing me into care, ethics of care, and feminist theory. And I'd actually never seen that map before in my head. So it was a really interesting, so thank you for that.
Cool. And it's such a good map. That is, the number of people who I read their application and they start with their PhD, and it's like blah 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 from their PhD onwards, right? Because most of the time I'm like, you don't even get to talk to me until you've got a PhD. These days you don't hardly get to talk to me until you've got a professorship. And I know that they've had a job like your job that's led them on the journey to the PhD, right? The other one is people get hung up on, I've got to talk all about my research, and they hardly ever talk about their teaching. And one way to talk about teaching is, I love teaching this subject, right? And I love teaching this subject because it feeds this part of my intellectual kind of development, right? I get a lot from it and I give a lot to it. And you can bring that in, right? Often, and sometimes there's a whole bunch of teaching you don't want to put in there, right? Because it doesn't feed anything except put money on the table. Yeah. yeah.
Yeah, very useful, Jonathan. It's certainly opening up my eyes.
Yeah, me too. And I've also done like a job interview for a postdoc position in the last few months. So that process, took me like there was quite a lot from like your early slides that I'd already done in that process, and I was quite comfortable with. But when you introduce the ideas of your inspiration and your admiration, I was like, oh, I didn't really deal with any of that. So that's really fascinating, because that opens up a whole different aspect of my journey as a researcher and how I would be presenting myself. So that was really, really useful. That kind of got me to think in a different way that hasn't really come up before. And then the mapping, just to reiterate, really, I love it because it for me, it sort of allows me to mentally take the CV from something that's kind of much more, I don't know, rigid and formal, and turn it into something that's much more about what's my story, what's my narrative.
Yeah. And there's a great I don't have the reference with me, but there was a great post that came out last year, the year before, by a researcher who had rewritten, just how you have the little blurb, this is who I am, this is what I do, blah blah blah, and she'd rewritten that and started with, I grew up on the country of the Wimba people, and she worked from there, and it all of a sudden it became a much different kind of vehicle, right? And we don't talk much about, or we don't introduce emotions much. That thing of admiration and also just attitudes. What attitudes did I get from working with these people, or from taking? It's where do I stand, and we're happy to say, oh, this is where I stand ideologically, and this is where I stand in terms of, I'm what is it? I'm HAS, or I'm STEM, and those sorts of theoretical kind of groundings. But I think this allows you to say, well, not only this is where I stand, but this is how I got here, and a little bit of this is where I'm going, and I just it makes it a much more interesting read. Anyway, we are coming to the end of our time, so because it is this is it, 6, is that right, Declan, or have we got more time?
Yeah, we said 6 on the poster.
Zoom is hard. Zoom is harder than, like, we were originally talking about 1.5 hours, and it's like, we can do it, but.
Well, I found it really useful too. So thanks. Yeah.
We can certainly be flexible, though, if anybody does want to leave or stay. I mean, ordinarily we would be doing this in a pub, and it would feel like a much more casual experience. We'd be drinking and eating chips and stuff like that. There's no way to quite get that over this.
No, the chip transport protocol hasn't been one of the things
I have a question though. Would you actually do this in a CV instead of putting it in the traditional format, or would you do it as well as, so you have these thematic clusters at the top of your CV, and then underneath you do the classic chronological order? Or would you be bold and do it instead of, or is that going to make it too hard to read?
Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about, and it absolutely depends on what the rules are, right?
The guidelines.
So the guidelines, that's right. So for, I'm most familiar with the Australian Research Council funding. So let's use them as an example of people who have very strict guidelines, right? 12-point Times New Roman or equivalent, black text, borders have to be this big. Your CV, there's a list of publications. There's a statement of a certain number of words that says, all right, well, what are kind of standard kind of modes for your discipline around publishing? You know, is it the main author is listed first or listed last or listed in alphabetical order? You know, those sorts of things. What are the main kind of journals? Is it books or is it journals or is it conference papers? So there's a bit of a statement around that. There's a statement around your work history. How much time have you had to do research in your work history? And what opportunities have you had? And then there's a statement that is essentially what have been your contributions to the field and what is the evidence of the quality of those contributions. And it's that bit that I'm talking about. So in a job application in Australia, it's different in different parts of the world. And if you're applying for a job somewhere else, please try and understand what the kind of rules or unwritten rules are in that place. But in Australia, by and large, there will be, particularly for the public sector, there will be a set of selection criteria, and often you have to respond to that selection criteria. And then there is a CV. And there are really often the only rules around a CV are length. You know, a CV of no more than 2 pages or a CV of no more than 10 pages. I had an applicant from America once say to me, but where do I attach my 50-page CV? And I'm just like, no one in this country is interested in reading your 50-page CV. I'm sorry. And it's there in that CV that you can really be bold, right? If you wanna have half an hour of fun, just type 1-page CV into Google, and there are some fantastic examples of how to effectively turn your CV into what we would call an infographic, right? And just reduce all of that information down into the really key kind of elements. But you could like when you look at a lot of CVs, it's really interesting. People from Europe often have their photo on their CV.
Yeah.
People in Australia hardly ever have their photo on their CV. No one now generally lists their gender on their CV.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at CVs from 15 years ago, half of them would have had it. If you go back 30 years ago, they probably all would have had it. Actually, if you go back 30 years, they would have all been male, so depending on the job. So we have progressed somewhat. But the rules around what you put into that CV are unwritten, and you can, you know, put it as a narrative. You can use bold to indicate what would normally be headings. And you might want to then go, and here's my publication list, particularly if it's academic job, because the publication list and, you know, citations for publications and things like that, that's something that everyone in academia understands. But if you're going for a job, you know, as a policy advisor in the public service, that's going to be the bit they're least interested in, you know. So you can play around. And also CVs also range enormously in length. If you're writing an academic paper, your CV is effectively reduced to your name, your university, and your email address, right? And that's pretty much all that exists of you. If you are published by a commercial author, there'll be like a half-page blurb. And all of a sudden, you've got to shrink everything down into a half-page blurb. So horses for courses. The other thing, if you want to have some fun, is look up CV of failure.
Oh, they're wonderful.
Yeah. Just people listing all the things they've been rejected from. And yeah, just go there.
Can I ask a...
No, you go.
Sure, Louisiana.
Okay, just a quick question on that, please. Would it be okay to add links to the CV? So instead of explaining all the stuff, putting some links, and if the person is interested, then he or she can.
Yeah, right. Okay, so that works in a couple of different ways. One is there are, yeah, okay. Turn the clock on. There's only 3 minutes, so I should talk about this. Hello. Oh no, one came and then disappeared. From my point of view, there are 3 sites you absolutely should have up to date. One is LinkedIn, right? You should have a profile that should be a reasonable profile. If you're an academic and you've published something, then Google Scholar, even if it's only got one thing, so that your name is underlined, and it's really easy to click on it and find it. And the third is if your university does it, depending, some do, some don't, but a university page where you get to say, this is who I am, you know, this is my contact hours, this is me, and this is my research. Because whether you put links in or not, people will Google you, right? It's just so quick and so easy now, particularly if your name is Louisiana, right? If your name is we don't have anyone here with a really common name, but you know, if your name is Joe Bloggs, it's a bit harder. But for most people, you can find them with and people will. When you're putting stuff into your CV, there's no problem putting links in, but do not use links as a way to try and stuff more in, right? Because
that's why I asked.
Right, you cannot depend that people will actually click on the link. And so it's really just supplementary material. You know, if it effectively what you're saying with the link, effectively you're saying, if you're really interested, here's more stuff you can spend time on. But almost any time you're putting a CV in for anything that's competitive, the person on the other end has a stack of them and they have a limited amount of time. So don't trust. They might, but you can't guarantee it.
Yeah, thank you. I have to do the job to communicate in few words the thing that the link would communicate. And please, or content of the link. But thank you.
Whatever you're doing, do not put your link under the word more, right? If you're gonna put a link in, use it to highlight a phrase that you want to draw attention to, right?
And also don't use a link and then turn it into a PDF, because often your link won't remain active once you've turned the document into a PDF.
Check that it works before you send it in. Absolutely.
I think we might have done that with the poster for this event. I think I turned it into a PDF and all the links work.
I've got to go because my kids need dinner, but I've really got a lot out of today, and it's a pleasure to meet you, having read about you too. So thanks for having me.
Sorry, Philippa, just before you go, if you want, I can put my email, I'm putting it in the chat now. If you want the slides, I can send it out to everyone after this.
I didn't think about that. So the slides have basically what I said as notes afterwards, because you may not be applying for something now, right? So get the notes and just put them away until you are applying for something, and then bring it out and do this exercise again. But I've got a full explanation of the stuff that I said.
So my email is in the chat. Send me an email whenever.
I can just ask something. I'm Joshi. I joined this workshop a little late because I was on another webinar. And do you happen to circulate the slides? Because I found it very interesting, and it's really fascinating to just ideate our journey of PhD and put it on this resume. But I missed the initial 20 minutes, I think, of this workshop. And I'd like to have the slides.
Declan has put his email into the chat, and if you email Declan or put your email into the chat, one way or the other, he will send the slides to you. But he needs to know where to send them.
Also, the session's been recorded, and we'll be putting it on the YouTube channel, I think, right, Rebecca?
Yep, we just made an AECURN YouTube channel, so this will hopefully be the first video that goes up there, and we're hoping to eventually turn it into a useful resource for ECRs.
Yeah, so if you follow us on Facebook or Twitter, we'll put a link up to that as well. And you can see, yeah, you can watch it back now. So
I've got a question. It might be quite a specific one. So what happens if, like, you've gathered all your evidence and the ideas behind it is just that you're just a very curious person and you like to try different projects?
Sure.
Sorry.
So how, rather than trying to say that you're like a polymath, like to do everything, how would you communicate that as an advantage?
Right. Okay. So there's a guy who works in environmental policy or environmental policy modeling at RMIT, who did his PhD and had a postdoc career in like astrophysics or something like that, like just a complete career change. And when we first talked about his CV, that was a bit of a challenge, because it's just like, well, here's my publication list, and the first few years of it, there's like Greek letters in the titles of my papers, right? And then I get on to, and of course there's a bit in the middle where it's mixed because there's a delay in publication. And what we talked about was, what are the fundamental things he can take from the first experience that he can then demonstrate really come to bear in the second experience. By and large, if you're applying for something, there's a reason that you're applying for it, and there's a kind of a particular face that you're trying to present to the people. And so it's about going, well, of all the different bits that I've done and my scattered little islands that I've sailed my pirate ship through in my journey, which ones do I want to present and what are they evidence of? I had an application, it was a job application from someone who had been a mum. She'd been a mum for the last 4 years or something, and she just used that as evidence effectively of project management skills. She said, I am managing a budget of this much. I am making sure 3 kids are dressed and get to school by this time. And she just talked about some of the things that being a mum had effectively taught her in a way. And it was a really effective way of, because it was a project management job. So it was a really effective way of bringing that to the fore. If you want to indicate that you are an interesting person, I would just pick 1 or 2 things. And you might say, for example, and I also am a well-established, butterfly hunter or whatever. Or you could pick 2 things that form an interesting contrast. I have a black belt in judo, and I also do something very gentle, something, I don't know, make paper mache animals for profit or something. And often you want to have something like that in your CV, because employers in particular will pick something like that and just mention it at the start of the interview as just an icebreaker. And I can remember doing an interview once where whatever thing it was they picked, I thought that was a question, and I just like froze, bunny in the headlights, and was just like, oh my God, why have they asked me about my stamp collection? And then thought it was a serious thing I had to answer. So I'm like, and for the first 5 minutes, I'm rabbiting on about whatever it was, my stamp collection or whatever. And yeah, so don't mistake the icebreaker for the actual question. If the trick is where there is no thread at all, where you really have been a dilettante and have just followed your whim and it's led you somewhere, and really you're just then saying, look, this is who I am, take me or leave me, right? And you're trying to present your best face for whatever you want to get about you're applying for. But you're just saying, look, I am who I am, and And for each of these things, here's how that is relevant to this job. You know, here is how my 12 months spent wandering the cheapest places on earth because I love travel, how that relates to this job in a university doing blah, right? And you just got to find a thread sometimes. It sounds like you've had lots of interesting threads, Linus.
I'm just curious and I like to try different things. So yeah, I'm like, it's kind of everywhere and I don't want to narrow down.
Yeah, right.
I still like to explore and learn.
One of the things that you want to, because there's also qualities, right, that you're trying to get across, and belief systems, right? And I'm not talking about belief systems like religion. I'm talking about belief systems like curiosity. Curiosity-driven research, it's a really powerful thing, right? It's something we really value. And so being able to say, look, you know, I believe strongly in the value of curiosity-driven research. Here's my paper on butterflies. Here's my paper on paper mache. Here's the 12 months I spent wandering the world, you know, and while I was doing it, in every place, I read something, you know, from the Middle Ages around that place, blah, 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 whatever, that demonstrates that. You can really bring that to the fore.
I think that's a really good point. And I actually wrote it down. I wrote the evidence of curiosity-driven research. What else in my notepad? Yes. And asking the unspoken, the hidden, the challenging questions that nobody likes to ask or wants to face. I think that's how it brought me to the different islands of projects.
The other thing to do is do this with a friend, right? And do it with a friend over a glass of red wine, because everything gets better when you had a couple of glasses of wine. But do it with a friend and swap your kind of maps, because often they will see links that you haven't identified. And they'll go, this and this, obviously they clump together. And what they're actually talking about is, this is who you are. This is who I see you as. So that can be kind of nice too. Yeah.
Thanks for the tip.
If we don't have any more questions, I think having a glass of wine with a friend is probably a good note to end on. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. This has been really, really helpful. I'm sure everyone's got a lot out of it.
Yes, so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time. And you'll be featured on our first YouTube video.
I will put that on my CV.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right.
See you guys later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so
See you
much,
next
Jonathan.
time.
Thank you.